Hey everybody, welcome to Be Like Christ for another 5-minute Bible study today, Judges chapter 16. The judge that we're going to be talking about, we're going to be wrapping up his story today, is Samson. And there's a ton to talk about in this chapter. It barely fit on the outline, so we'll try to move as quickly as we can. As we've mentioned several times, most scholars place the period of the judges between 1450 BC and 1000 BC. Most scholars place the life of Samson somewhere between 1175 BC and 1075 BC. Now let's try to pinpoint where exactly the events of this chapter took place. The Philistines tried to ambush Samson at Gaza, which is on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, but he escaped to the city of Hebron. Now, Samson's going to meet Delilah, in this chapter. She lived in the valley of Sorek, which runs next to the city of Timnah. And then Samson's going to be imprisoned at the end of this chapter, and that was in the city of Gaza. The main character in this chapter is, of course, Samson, the 13th judge over Israel. Now, the Spirit of God blessed Samson with supernatural strength and power. That's kind of what he's known for. Then we have Delilah. Delilah is not Samson's friend. Delilah was Samson's lover who ended up betraying him. And then the Philistines. God allowed the Philistine nation to oppress the Israelites for 40 years because the Israelites broke their covenant with God and they didn't obey his instructions. Now we move over to this very beefy outline that we have today, and the first section is one of the most interesting stories in, I think, all the Old Testament. But in very Bible-esque fashion, the most interesting stories often get very little space. Verses 1 through 3, Samson escapes with the gates of Gaza. Verses 1 through 3, I already said that. So Samson went to a prostitute's house in Gaza and he spent the night. And when the Philistines found out that he was there, they set an ambush to kill him in the morning. But Samson knew about this. He got up at midnight and he tore the gates of the city off of the walls. He left town with the gates in tow. He carried the gates approximately 37 miles, that would be 60 kilometers, and he put the gates on top of a hill in Hebron. Now, you probably have questions and want more details, but that's all you get. Section number 2, we have the notorious story of Samson and Delilah, verses 4 through 22. So Samson fell in love with this woman named Delilah. He's got more woman problems coming his way. The Philistine lords came to Delilah, and they promised that they would each give her 1,100 pieces of silver if she could figure out the source of Samson's great strength. So Delilah asked Samson what it would take to bind him, and he lied to her, and he told her that if he was bound with 7 fresh bowstrings, then he would lose his strength and he would become like any other man. Now the Philistines brought Delilah these bowstrings, and then they set an ambush for Samson in Delilah's place. And Delilah tied up Samson with these bowstrings, and then she cried out, quote, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." Samson snapped the bowstrings like they were nothing, and the Philistines failed to catch him. Now, the same thing happened 2 more times. 2 more times Samson lies to Delilah. The second time, Samson told Delilah that she needed to bind him with 2 new ropes, but that turned out to be a lie. The third time, Samson told Delilah that she needed to braid the 7 locks of his head into a web, but that was also a lie. By the 4th time, Samson was tired of Delilah's questioning, and he finally told her the truth. Dumb. That was so dumb I even put dumb on the outline. So Samson told her that if his head was shaved, he would lose all of his strength. And this was true because Samson's hair was part of his Nazirite vow to God. You can read about the Nazirite vow in Numbers chapter 6. Samson was a Nazirite since he was born, since birth. When Delilah realized that this time he was finally telling her the truth, she called the lords of the Philistines to her, and she had them set another ambush. And while Samson slept, Delilah had a man come and shave Samson's head. When Samson awoke, all of his strength was gone, and he was just like any other man, and the Philistines were able to capture him. They did more than capture him. They tore out his eyes, They put him in shackles and they put him to work grinding grain in the prison. So we see Samson's foolishness leads to a very swift demise for such a powerful man. But the section ends with kind of a bit of light, a bit of hope. It says, quote, "But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved." So he's in this prison grinding grain, but the strength is returning. That leads us to section number 3, verses 23 through 31. This is going to be the end of Samson's life, the victory and the death of Samson. There was one day when the Philistines gathered to offer sacrifices to their idol named Dagon and to celebrate the capture of their great enemy Samson. And they requested that Samson be brought to them so that they could mock him. Samson obviously couldn't see, so he had the young man who was leading him show him where the pillars that supported the building were located. He asked specifically to be taken to those pillars. When his hands were on those pillars, Samson prayed to God, saying, quote, "O Lord God, please remember me only this once, O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." So then, grasping the 2 supporting pillars of this great structure that the Philistines had gathered in, Samson pulled them down with all of his might, and the whole building collapsed. And as the building collapsed, it collapsed and killed Samson, at least 3,000 people, and we're told all the lords of the Philistines. So Samson, he was killed, and his family came and took his body and buried his body. And we're told at the end of the chapter that Samson judged Israel for 20 years. And so now you know the life and story of the 13th judge of Israel. Now for our application section. Samson's life teaches us about God's grace towards imperfect people. You might look at Samson and say, it wasn't exactly the role model I want my son to grow up to be, and that's probably true. But did you know that Samson's name is found alongside those of Abraham and Joseph and Moses in Hebrews 11, a chapter that honors men of great faith? So what do we do with Samson's life? What do we take away? What lessons? Whatever you do, don't take away that this is just a license to sin and God will still be gracious to you, right? That's the wrong lesson. Instead, let Samson's life teach you about the abundance of God's forbearance and kindness towards imperfect people.